I told myself not to expect anything this year. No big plans, no party, no gifts wrapped in shiny paper. Just a quiet birthday, the kind you pretend you're comfortable with once you reach a certain age. I cooked dinner for myself, nothing fancy, a meal I knew how to make with my eyes closed. I set the table for two out of habit, then quietly removed the extra plate. The candles on the small cake flickered while my phone stayed dark. No message. No call. No, sorry I'm running late. Again. My parents tried to soften it, the way they always did. She's busy, you know how she is. I nodded, smiled, and swallowed the familiar ache that came with being forgotten without anyone calling it that. After a while, I stepped outside to get some air. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, and that's when everything changed. My sister froze mid-step, her eyes locked on the car parked by the curb. My name is Emily Carter, and that night was my 32nd birthday. The Porsche wasn't meant to be a statement. It wasn't even supposed to be noticed. I had parked it down the street earlier, hoping no one would connect it to me. Old habits die hard, especially the habit of staying small. But my sister noticed. Her face shifted in a way I had never seen before. Confusion first, then disbelief, and finally, something that looked dangerously close to panic. She asked the question slowly, like the answer might break something if she said it out loud. "Whose car is that?" I didn't rush to answer. I watched her carefully, the way you do when you sense the ground beneath a relationship starting to crack. My parents stepped closer, drawn by the tension they didn't yet understand. When I said, "It's mine," the night went quiet. Too quiet. She laughed once sharp, forced, then asked again, louder this time, as if volume could turn my words into a joke. "You're serious?" I was. For years, my birthdays had passed like background noise. A quick text, a late card, sometimes nothing at all. My sister never came. She always had a reason, a meeting, a trip, a better place to be. And I always understood. Or at least, I pretended to. Standing there, watching her stare at something she hadn't expected me to have, I realized something painful and freeing at the same time. She hadn't missed my birthday because she was busy. She missed it because, in her mind, I was still the same person I'd always been. The quiet one. The invisible one. The sister who didn't change the balance of the room. The Porsche wasn't what scared her. It was the possibility that she no longer knew where she stood. And for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to explain myself. I didn't downplay it. I didn't make her comfortable. I just stood there, next to the cake no one sang over, and let the silence do what it had avoided doing for years. Tell the truth. I didn't always understand that I was invisible. At first, I thought it was just the way families worked. Someone had to be the loud one, someone had to be the successful one, and someone, quietly, had to make everything easier. That someone was always me. Growing up, my sister filled rooms without trying. Teachers remembered her name. Relatives asked about her plans, her grades, her future. When she spoke, people leaned in. When she laughed, the room followed. I learned early how to stand slightly to the side. At family gatherings, adults would ruffle my hair absent-mindedly, then turn right back to her. "You must be so proud," they'd say to my parents, never specifying which child. They didn't have to. Everyone knew. Birthdays made it clearer. Hers were events. Balloons, surprise dinners, photos that ended up framed on the living room wall. Mine were quieter, sometimes combined with someone else's celebration, sometimes postponed, sometimes forgotten entirely. And when I noticed, when I felt the sting, I told myself it didn't matter. I was low maintenance. I was understanding. I was mature for my age. Those words followed me like compliments, but they were really instructions. Don't ask for more. So I didn't. When my sister skipped my birthdays, it was never framed as neglect. It was always circumstance. She had deadlines, flights, important things. And everyone agreed out loud and without discussion that my birthday was flexible. I smiled through it. I even defended her. "She's busy," I'd say before anyone else could. I became so good at it that eventually no one asked how I felt. That's how invisibility works. It's not loud. It's quiet, repetitive, and polite. By my 20s, the pattern felt permanent. I showed up. I helped. I listened. When something went wrong, I adapted. When plans changed, I adjusted. I learned how to disappear in ways that looked like kindness. What no one saw was how much energy it took. I watched my sister build a version of herself that the family celebrated, while I quietly learned how to survive without applause. When she talked about her wins, people clapped. When I mentioned something I was working on, the conversation drifted elsewhere. So I stopped mentioning things. Not because I had nothing going on, but because I was tired of shrinking my voice mid-sentence. I told myself I didn't need recognition, that being steady was enough, that being reliable mattered more than being seen. And for a long time, I believed it. But birthdays have a way of revealing the truth. Every year, there was a moment, sometimes small, sometimes sharp, when I realized I was alone in a room full of people. When the cake was cut without ceremony, when the candles burned quietly while conversations continued around me, I'd make a wish anyway, always the same one. Please let this stop hurting. I didn't resent my sister. Not consciously. Resentment felt too loud for someone like me. Instead, I internalized it. I wondered what I was doing wrong, why I wasn't memorable, why my presence didn't shift the air. And the hardest part? Everyone assumed I was fine. Because I never complained. Because I never demanded space. Because I never made anyone uncomfortable. In my family, comfort mattered more than fairness. So I learned how to be agreeable instead of honest. I learned how to clap quietly for other people's milestones while mine passed unmarked. I learned how to tell myself that love didn't need proof. But invisibility leaves marks you don't see right away. It teaches you to expect less, to apologize for wanting more, to celebrate yourself in private and downplay it in public. By the time I reached my 30s, I had become very good at being overlooked, and I thought that was just who I was. Until the night my sister looked at me, not past me, not around me, but directly at me, standing beside something she never expected me to have. That night didn't change the past, but it forced me to finally see it. The quiet years didn't begin with a decision. They began with exhaustion. At some point, I stopped explaining myself not out of secrecy, but out of habit. Every time I tried to share something about my life, the room seemed to tilt away from me. Phones came out. Conversations shifted. Someone would interrupt with a story that felt louder, more important. So I learned to keep things to myself. I moved through my 20s without an audience. I worked jobs that didn't sound impressive when said out loud. Long hours, small apartments, late nights where the only witness to my effort was the hum of a laptop and the quiet click of a keyboard. No one asked how I was doing, and after a while, I stopped hoping they would. I failed more times than I ever admitted. There were months when my bank account hovered dangerously low, when I counted groceries carefully, when I questioned whether I had chosen the wrong path entirely. On those nights, I thought about calling my parents, about asking for reassurance. But I already knew how those conversations would end. Your sister figured it out faster. Maybe you should do something more stable. You've always been independent. You'll be fine. 18 I work. So, I stayed silent and figured it out myself. I learned skills quietly. I took courses no one knew about. I stayed up late studying things that didn't come with immediate praise. When something didn't work, I adjusted. When it failed completely, I started again. There was no celebration, no applause, just progress, slow, invisible, steady. The more independent I became, the less I felt the need to announce it. Not because I was humble, but because sharing felt pointless. Success, when unacknowledged, teaches you a strange lesson. Validation isn't guaranteed, so build anyway. I built discipline instead. I built routines that didn't rely on encouragement. I built confidence that didn't need agreement. I built a life that made sense to me, even if it looked unremarkable from the outside. Family gatherings became easier once I stopped trying to be seen. I answered questions briefly. I smiled politely. I asked about everyone else. I became good at deflecting attention away from myself. Same old, I'd say when asked how work was going. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. What they never saw were the years I chose consistency over comfort, the times I said no to things that would have made life easier but left me dependent, the patience it took to grow without shortcuts. And I never corrected their assumptions. If they thought I was doing okay, I let them. If they assumed I was behind, I didn't argue. There was a strange safety in being underestimated. No pressure to perform, no expectations to meet, just room to grow quietly. The Porsche didn't appear overnight. It was the result of choices no one noticed, of restraint, of staying invisible long enough to become unrecognizable. When I finally bought it, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post photos. I didn't celebrate publicly. I signed the papers alone, sat in the driver's seat, and took a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. It wasn't about luxury. It was about proof. Proof that the quiet years counted. That invisibility didn't mean insignificance. That growing without witnesses still meant growth. So when my sister stared at that car with disbelief, what she was really seeing wasn't money. She was seeing time. Years she hadn't watched. Effort she hadn't noticed. A version of me she had never bothered to imagine. And standing there, in the aftermath of my forgotten birthday, I understood something clearly for the first time. They didn't miss my life because it was empty. They missed it because it happened without them. The first thing my sister noticed wasn't me. It was the car. She had been halfway through one of her familiar excuses, her voice light and dismissive, already preparing to step past me the way she always did. But then her words slowed, thinned out, until they stopped completely. Her eyes shifted over my shoulder. "What is that?" she asked, pointing toward the curb. I turned, already knowing what she was looking at. The Porsche sat there quietly, polished, but unannounced, reflecting the soft glow of the streetlight. It didn't demand attention. It didn't need to. It simply existed solid, undeniable. "Just a car," I said. She laughed once, the sound brittle. "No, seriously. Whose is it?" I didn't answer right away. I watched her instead. Watched the way her posture changed, the way her confidence wavered just slightly, as if the room had tilted in a direction she hadn't prepared for. "It's mine," I said. The silence that followed was different from the ones I was used to. This wasn't the polite silence of disinterest. This one was heavy, alert, searching. My parents stepped closer, their attention finally fixed on me in a way it rarely had been. My mother frowned, as if trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't known existed. My father cleared his throat, then said nothing. My sister stared at me, her mouth opening and closing once before she found her voice again. "Yours?" she repeated. "As in, you bought it?" I nodded. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Since when?" There it was, the question she really meant to ask. Since when had I become someone she didn't recognize? I could have explained then. I could have filled the silence with years of effort, long nights, quiet discipline. I could have softened it, made it easier for her to absorb. But something in me held still. "Recently," I said. Her gaze flicked back to the car, then to me, as if checking for inconsistencies. As if she expected the truth to slip up and reveal itself as a mistake. "That's impressive," she said finally, though the word sounded unfamiliar on her tongue. For the first time in my life, she didn't know where to place me. The roles we'd rehearsed for decades had suddenly disappeared. I wasn't the sibling who needed advice. I wasn't the one catching up. I wasn't behind her anymore. She asked a few more questions, what I did, how long I'd been doing it, but her curiosity felt rushed, unsettled. She wasn't trying to understand me. She was trying to regain her footing. My parents watched quietly, uncertain now. The balance they had grown comfortable with was shifting, and no one had agreed on new positions. I noticed something else too. No one mentioned my birthday. Not the missed call. Not the empty chair at the table. Not the cake still sitting inside, half-melted candles leaning to one side. The moment my success entered the conversation, my absence earlier that evening became irrelevant. And that hurt more than I expected, because it confirmed what I had always suspected. I was only visible when I disrupted the narrative. My sister finally met my eyes again, really looked at me this time. There was no warmth there, only calculation. An unspoken question hung between us. "Who are you now?" I didn't answer it. I didn't need to. The car had already said enough. And as I stood there, watching her struggle to reconcile the version of me she'd ignored with the reality in front of her, I understood something quietly. completely. She hadn't been paying attention. And now, she didn't know what to do with what she saw. At first, my sister tried to hide it. She laughed a little too often, asked questions that sounded casual but came out rushed, complimented the car again, this time louder, as if volume could turn discomfort into admiration. But panic has a way of leaking through the cracks. It wasn't the Porsche that unsettled her. Not really. Money had never intimidated her. She had always believed she understood the hierarchy of our family, the unspoken order that placed her firmly at the top, and me somewhere beneath, steady and harmless. What scared her was uncertainty. She didn't know when it had happened. She didn't know how long she'd been wrong. And most unsettling of all, she didn't know how much she'd missed. Her questions kept coming. So, what exactly do you do now? Are you working with someone? You must have had help, right? Each one landed like a probe, searching for an explanation that would make my growth feel less threatening. Something temporary, something lucky, something that didn't require her to rewrite the story she'd been telling herself for years. I answered politely, briefly, without details. And that only made her more uneasy. She began shifting the conversation towards safer ground: family, memories, nostalgia. She talked about how busy life had been, how everyone had grown apart, how we should make more of an effort to stay close. We should really get together more, she said, touching my arm lightly, a gesture that felt rehearsed. You know, family matters. That was when it clicked. She wasn't afraid of my success. She was afraid of losing her position. For most of our lives, she had been the reference point, the example, the one others compared themselves to. My invisibility had allowed her to shine without competition, without question. And now, without warning, the ground had shifted. I saw it in the way she watched my parents, in the way she waited for their reactions, for reassurance that the familiar balance would be restored. But my parents were quiet now, uncertain, adjusting to a version of me they hadn't prepared for. The power dynamic had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. My sister tried to regain control by reframing the moment. She joked about me, finally catching up. She teased me about keeping secrets. She laughed as if we were sharing a harmless surprise rather than standing at the edge of something uncomfortable. But the panic lingered in her eyes. Because if I no longer needed approval, if I no longer fit the role she understood, then her influence over me, over the family narrative, was suddenly limited. She could no longer dismiss me. She could no longer overlook me. And she could no longer predict me. That kind of loss is terrifying to people who rely on comparison to feel secure. The more she talked, the clearer it became. She wasn't interested in my journey. She wanted reassurance that nothing essential had changed. But everything had. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't confront her. I simply listened, the way I always had, but this time, without shrinking, without apologizing for the space I occupied. And she noticed that too. For the first time, she was speaking to me without knowing where she stood, without knowing whether her words still carried weight. That uncertainty made her restless, careful, almost polite. When she finally left that night, her goodbye was warmer than usual, too warm. The kind of warmth people use when they're afraid of burning bridges they never thought they'd need. As I watched her walk away, one thought settled calmly in my mind. She wasn't scared of what I had. She was scared of what she no longer controlled. And for the first time, I understood that my silence hadn't protected the relationship. It had protected her comfort. The confrontation didn't happen the way people imagine these things happen. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic accusations. It happened quietly, almost accidentally, when the rest of the family drifted back inside and my sister lingered near the porch, pretending to scroll through her phone. I could feel it coming. Conversations like this don't need invitations. They arrive when avoidance stops working. You really could have told us, she said without looking up. Her voice was calm but not relaxed. We're family. I waited a moment before answering. Not to build tension, but to choose clarity. I didn't hide anything, I said. You just never asked. That made her look up. She smiled slightly, the way people do when they're trying to keep control of a situation that's slipping. That's not fair. You know I would have supported you. I met her eyes then, fully, without apology. You weren't there, I said. Not for this birthday. Not for the ones before it. And not for most of my life. Her expression tightened. That's not what this is about, she replied quickly. You're making it personal. It is personal, I said, evenly. It's my life. She crossed her arms, defensive now. So what, you're mad because I missed a dinner? I shook my head. You didn't miss my birthday, I said. You missed who I became. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. For a moment, she didn't speak. The practiced confidence she usually carried faltered, replaced by something uncertain, vulnerable even. I didn't know, she said finally, softer this time. I know, I replied. That's the point. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy, and I had spent too many years conserving mine just to survive. This isn't about the car, I continued, or money, or proving anything. It's about the fact that I stopped waiting to be noticed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I could see her trying to find a way back to familiar ground, jokes, excuses, shared history, but I wasn't following her there. I don't need you to catch up, I said, and I don't need you to understand every part of my life. I just need you to stop assuming you know it. The porch was quiet. Inside, laughter drifted faintly from the kitchen, unaware that something old and heavy was being laid down outside. I'm not cutting you off, I added, but things are different now. It's tell Fidio willing on. Her eyes searched my face, looking for something guilt, reassurance, permission. I offered none of it. I won't explain myself anymore, I said, and I won't shrink to keep anyone comfortable. She nodded slowly, though I could tell she wasn't ready for what that meant. When she finally spoke again, her voice was careful. I guess I didn't realize how far you'd gone. I gave a small, tired smile. Neither did I, not until I stopped looking back. That was it. No dramatic ending, no resolution wrapped in a bow, just the quiet understanding that the roles we'd played no longer applied. And as I walked back inside, past the untouched cake and the candles that had long since burned out, I felt something settle in my chest. Not victory, peace. Because, for the first time, I had said exactly what needed to be said and nothing more. I didn't walk away that night with anger burning in my chest. If anything, I felt lighter. For years I had believed that distance meant rejection, that stepping back from family meant choosing loneliness. But standing there, watching the candles on my birthday cake melt into quiet wax, I understood something I had never allowed myself to before. Distance can be protection. I didn't make a dramatic announcement. I didn't list grievances or demand apologies. I simply stopped doing what I had always done. I stopped over-explaining. When my sister reached out in the days that followed, her messages were warmer than usual, filled with careful words and vague invitations. We should catch up soon. Let's not let time pass like this. I read them without urgency. I replied politely, briefly, without rearranging my life to accommodate them. And that was new. I didn't punish her. I didn't withdraw out of spite. I just set limits where there had never been any before. I no longer answered every call immediately. I no longer filled silences with reassurance. I no longer smoothed over discomfort to keep the peace. At family gatherings, I showed up as myself, not quieter, not smaller, not apologetic. When conversations drifted past me, I didn't chase them. When assumptions were made, I didn't rush to correct them. I let people meet me where I was, or not at all. The most surprising part wasn't how others reacted. It was how calm I felt. There was no urge to prove anything. No need to convince anyone that my choices were valid. I had already done the hardest part, accepting them myself. My sister struggled with the shift. I could see it in the way she hesitated before speaking, in the way she searched my face for familiar cues, but I didn't offer them. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you choose when to open. I didn't close her out. I just stopped leaving myself open to be overlooked. And for the first time, our relationship felt honest. Less comfortable, perhaps, but real. Walking away without revenge doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means you refuse to let it define you. It means choosing peace over performance. That night, when I finally sat alone with a slice of cake and a cup of tea, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt grounded. Because I had learned something essential at 32. You don't owe constant access to people who only notice you when you change the story. The Porsche stayed parked outside that night, quiet and still, like it had done nothing at all. And in a way, it hadn't. It wasn't the car that changed my relationship with my sister. It wasn't the price tag, the brand, or the way her expression shifted when she realized it was mine. Those things only revealed what had already been there. What changed everything was something far less visible. It was the moment I stopped needing to be seen by people who had grown comfortable overlooking me. For a long time, I thought success was about finally being noticed, about proving gently, respectfully, without causing discomfort, that I mattered too. I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed patient enough, stayed quiet enough, someone would eventually turn around and say, "I see you now." But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, the people who miss you the longest are the ones most unsettled when you no longer wait for them to notice. The Porsche didn't give me power. It showed me where my power had been all along. In the years when no one asked how I was doing, I learned how to listen to myself. In the birthdays that passed quietly, I learned how to celebrate my own growth. In the silence, I built something solid, something that didn't depend on applause or permission. And that's the real meaning of that night. Not money, not envy, not shock. Freedom. Freedom from comparison. Freedom from roles that no longer fit. Freedom from explaining my worth to people who only measure it when it disrupts their comfort. I didn't win anything by being overlooked, but I gained clarity by surviving it. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Being ignored doesn't mean you're insignificant. It often means you're growing in directions others never bothered to imagine. And when they finally notice, it can feel unsettling for them. But for you, it can feel like peace. So, if you've ever sat at a table where your absence went unnoticed, or blown out candles while conversations continued around you, know this. Your life doesn't need witnesses to be real. Keep building. Keep choosing yourself. And when you're ready, stop shrinking to make room for people who never made room for you. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If any part of it felt familiar, if it reminded you of your own family, your own quiet strength, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been overlooked by the people closest to you? What changed when you stopped waiting for their approval? And if stories like this matter to you, stories about dignity, boundaries, and finding your voice later than expected, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Sometimes, the greatest turning points don't come with applause. They come with silence and the courage to walk forward anyway.